First of all, your response to the tragic news of Suna Venta's death.
Joanne, we're absolutely devastated by the death of Suna Venta. It was very sudden, obviously very unexpected. We are shocked and we are devastated by this. Suna was a journalist who really fought for media freedom. She was a journalist who was courageous, who was brave, who was kind, and we're really sorry for the loss of Suna Venta.
You know, a lot of people are commenting on the cardiac condition she suffered from, which was clearly exacerbated by the stress of the last few months involving all the machinations around the SABC8 and what they went through. That really was a tough time for South African journalism in which she was caught up, wasn't it?
Joanne, Suna Venta went through unprecedented events in the past year or so. She was given death threats, she was intimidated, her home was ransacked, she was abducted, she was tied to a tree, she was shot at with an unknown weapon, she had to undergo surgery to remove metal pellets from her head. What she has gone through, what she had gone through in this past year was really shocking, not just for her personally, but a terrible thing to happen to any journalist in our country. So yes, her family is saying natural causes. She had a heart condition, broken heart syndrome, but they do believe that these terrible events of the past year exacerbated, if not actually caused, that heart condition.
It's very sad indeed. Let's move on to the issue of Peter Bruce. We've seen the Black First Land First movement gather outside his home this morning, targeting him. How exactly does SANEF respond to what Peter Bruce himself is undergoing at this moment?
Well, SANEF strongly and unconditionally condemns what has happened today outside the home of Peter Bruce. We find it totally unacceptable that the home of a journalist would be targeted. You know, Joanne, it's not unusual for protesters to march on media houses, for protesters to appear outside newsrooms. And over the years, we've grown to accept that. But to be at the home of a journalist is totally unacceptable, because at the end of the day, journalism is not a crime. And what Peter Bruce does was just exercise his rights, his constitutionally entrenched rights to speak out as a journalist in South Africa.
But of course there is a wider issue here. We know that a story broke the other day about Peter Bruce, his close family and friends being monitored, being spied upon essentially over the last year or so. Exactly under what conditions are South African journalists of Peter Bruce's caliber having to undergo at this point?
These are very, very difficult times in our country, Joanne, and we're seeing more and more journalists are being targeted. They're being targeted with this phenomenon of what we call fake news. Social media is now being weaponized against us as journalists and as editors. It's being used to target journalists, and it really is tough. The reality is, though, that if you have a look at many of the journalists who've been targeted, because it's not just Peter Bruce alone, he is part of a very long and growing list, I might add, of journalists who keep getting targeted for doing stories, particularly about state capture, for example, or speaking out about what is going on around the Gupta leaks, for example. So it is not, we're not going through an easy time, but I think our message as SANEF is that as journalists, as editors, we ask all of our members to stay strong and keep telling these stories and keep doing the job that we are constitutionally protected to do. Media freedom is entrenched in our constitution, and journalism is not a crime.
Who do we turn to as journalists when we face the kind of dilemma that Peter Bruce is facing right now, given the fact that we know we have a job to do, we try our best to fulfill that responsibility, and our media companies do their best to protect us in fulfilling that responsibility. But is there somewhere else, is there an organ of state, for example, that we have the right to go to demand protection from under these circumstances?
Well, I think we should use all the organs of state, actually. I think we should call on the police. I think charges should be laid at our local police stations. And I certainly think that we should go the legal route if needs be. You know, SANEF certainly encourages Peter Bruce to go that route, and any other journalists who are intimidated or threatened in any way, because there is that level of protection that is in our constitution. So I certainly do think that we need to go that route, follow the letter of the law, and hopefully via some legal action, something can be done.
Thank you so much for talking to us. Kate Nkatha-Podis of SANEF joining